In this lesson, we'll take a look at the Mudbox starting meshes and also some of the options for viewing those meshes. So in Mudbox, we need to have some sort of geometry to be able to sculpt and detail and work with. Mudbox does provide several starting point meshes for us to work with. Now here we've got that basic head that we added earlier, and you can see it in our object list, listed right at the bottom. You can see that I can open it up and lets me see some information about the number of faces in here. I can turn the visibility of that off and on by clicking on this little dot. Okay, I can also lock it. You can see it turns a little bit sort of milky or gray, letting us know that we can't access that model right now until we unlock it. Let's start to bring in some other meshes to go along with this. So this is great for experimenting with some facial sculpting and head sculpting, and you can go up to Create, Mesh, and you can access that basic head here. We also have some other options. So if you want to work with hard surfaces, you could bring in the car, and you can see it actually brings in a couple of meshes. I can select one or both of these objects, and I'll just select the car body and then shift select the wheels in the object list. I could also come in here and under the select and move tools, I can choose objects, and I can select the objects that way. You can see it doesn't look like anything is selected at this point. If I go to translate though, I can move this, maybe. There we go. But if I want to select both of them, I can select both of the objects at the same time, and I can translate those off, move them off here, off to the side. So just drag that over. You can also come in and bring in, there's a human body which you can bring in. You can see the scale of this is a little bit different, but we can bring this in and move it off to the side as well. Now if you want to see a particular one of these models and not see the other ones, you could go in and just turn off the visibility on everything but the part that you want to see. Or you could right click on the particular object and go to Isolate, and that'll just let you view that object. So then you can come in here, work on that object, right click again, turn off Isolate, and now you're back with your entire scene. And so that's a nice way to really quickly access particular models while not having to worry about the other models in your scene. All right, now we can go ahead and select any of these models, and I can change the name by right clicking, go to rename object, and I can change the name of this over here. We can also take, or change rather, the way that we see our models in here. And so if I go ahead and right click into 3D view, I can, for instance, turn on wireframe. That'll allow me to see the topology of the mesh, so I can see how the edges flow on a particular model. Okay. I can also hit the W key on my keyboard to toggle that wireframe on and off in the same way. All right, we can also choose whether or not we want to see the lighting. So we can turn the lighting off or on. We can also choose to see it using flat lighting. So rather than seeing the shading, we could just see the flat lighting there. We could also turn off smooth shading. So we'll be able to see kind of a faceted view. It's almost like hardening the normals and then softening them back up by turning on smooth shading. We can also choose to see both sides. So what that means is, if we come out down here, for instance, under this head, it looks like there's no geometry back here, but as I turn around, you can see there actually is. We're just seeing through the back side of it. So if we want to see both sides of our polygons, we can choose to turn on show both sides, and that'll allow us to see that sort of dark inside of our mesh. So depending on your preferences, you can choose to turn that on or off. So as you're starting out, unless you have some 3D meshes that you've created in another application, maybe you want to just start by bringing in some of these starting points. So you've got a lot of different things that you can bring in to just start sculpting and experimenting. So you've got a dinosaur, you've got spheres and cubes, so simple shapes. And in addition to that, you can play around with the human body and head if you want to practice your sort of human sculpting or anatomy sculpting. You can do that all in here. And so these starting point meshes can be accessed under Create, Mesh, and you can find those here. I should mention also that you can add your own meshes to that list when you get to that point. So for instance, if we were to take this head, and I'm just going to really quickly modify it a little bit just so it's obvious that it's changed. And so we'll kind of just modify it a bit. Okay, so let's say that we've now created this base mesh, and we want to have this as a sort of starting point for us. So whatever this may be, in this case it's just a slightly modified version of this. But to do this, we would go ahead and just save it. So go to Save Scene As. Sorry, we wanted to actually save the model. So let's actually export this. So we only want this mesh, so we'll export it instead. Go to Export Selection. We'll navigate to our program files, Autodesk, Mudbox 2014, and then I'm going to come down here into Meshes, open this up, and let's choose to save this as a .mud file. You'll see the listing of all the other options, and so we'll just call this something like Alien Head, and let's just save that out. And so now, if we wanted to come in and start a new scene here, we could go to Create Now, Mesh, and now in addition to all the Mudbox starting meshes, our Alien Head starting mesh is in there. So, once you get into this, you'll be creating your own meshes, and if you find something that works for you and you want to be able to start with it every time, you can go ahead and drop it in there, and that'll actually add it to that list. So this is a cool little feature I thought I would mention as well when talking about the starting meshes. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the starting meshes, the display options for our objects. In the next lesson, let's take a look at some of the different ways that we can get external geometry into our scene. So really, most of the time, you're not going to need to use the starting meshes because they're for a very specific purpose. They're good for practice, but once you start working on your own projects, it needs to be much more custom, of course. And so in the next lesson, we'll talk about sending geometry back and forth between Mudbox and other applications, and also bringing geometry in from other applications in different ways. So we'll go ahead and talk about that next.